I'm pretty sure everyone in this room is planning how they're going to automate and has very serious automation plans. It wasn't always like that. 10 years ago, automation was this nice geeky luxury, something that we thought can help us do some of the things faster, maybe test at night, maybe run some stuff during the weekends. And this has changed dramatically. And today, I think we would all agree that testing is rather mandatory. Some would even go to extreme and say that they can do 100% of their testing with test automation. But for sure, today, test and test automation is almost a synonym. And everyone knows they need to automate. So I see you as very, very small, in the very, very small picture. I can actually try. So I don't know if you're nodding or not, but I hope that everyone here plans to automate.
Tell me, do you, in your experience, Maya, is 100% automation coverage realistic, or is it just directional? Well,
for some companies, it is real. Whether it is or isn't scalable, that's a good question. I think right now it still isn't. But as a direction, I think that we hear that more and more. At least, you know, coming from an automation company, this is definitely a vision that we are gradually more and more exposed to. And when we talk about automation, I don't know if you ever asked yourself, why are we automating? What's the goal of automating more? And if you think about it, it could be easy, right? If you automate, you can test faster and you can test more, right? If we test more in less time, we get better coverage for our application. So we can make sure we can cover all the test cases that we want to test, maybe in 30 minutes instead of 4 days. So we can release faster. So it sounds very straightforward. But I think the problem is that we realize pretty fast that when we start automating, it's not only the testing that happens very fast. Everything happens fast. So we start getting more and more results much more quickly. And then if we test faster, we also fail faster, which means now we need to start understanding what's going on. And I think one of the most sobering moments of automation for me is the red build. I don't know, anyone ever had that? Looking at, you know, coming in the morning, looking at a report full of fails and really, really wanting your morning coffee and wondering what is really wrong. Is it the application? Is it your tests that something is really wrong with them? Is it something in the setup and the configuration? And you just know that it's going to take your whole day to figure it out, right? So much for agile. This is not the agile that we had in mind. And sometimes your thought your thinking is, okay, let's not automate more. And Justin was just telling me a good point yesterday about, you know, trying to make the test succeed, the automation test succeed, so that you don't have to deal with it. That's a bad way to deal with it.
Yeah, the point got raised again today about the challenge of making sure that you're not just making sure you pass the test for the sake of getting your bonus and passing the test, but actually getting better quality software. So if you over-test, you are almost only judging the quality of the frequency of your testing rather than the quality of the software.
Exactly, or your coverage. So it's really nice to see this nice 98, 86, or whatever % makes you happy, but it doesn't always say much. And I think that we need to change the way that we look at this goal. The real challenge, the real goal is not coverage, it's trust. Because our strategic goal with automation is get faster or get better quality that our customers can trust. And the same goes with automation. How do we make sure that our automation is reliable enough? That should be the question. How can we make sure that each one of these red warning signs in our report is really worth looking into? And how can we make sure that it's easier to isolate the issues and reproduce the problems if we need to? I think that's becoming the center of attention right now. And if we drill down deeper into the trust problem, then one of the main reasons why we don't trust automation is everything that has to do with test environments. And by test environments, I mean having the right application versions, including third-party components, and putting them on the right infrastructure, whether it is your data center or public cloud, and having the right data set.
So we find that these three issues come up constantly as blockers to good software quality. Whenever we do research, these are the three most constant issues: that we don't have the right applications, we don't have reliable test data, we don't have on-demand infrastructure. How would you prioritize amongst those three?
Well, I wouldn't. I think there are three as important components, and they are all critical for the test to succeed. We can't start with one of them. We have to look at them as one unit, right? It's the test environment. It's also a good way to look at it from an automation perspective because it's a reusable unit. You use test environments for many tests. So as a unit that includes the applications, the infrastructure, and the data, it is something that is very reusable as a whole. And I think today this is a big problem. It used to be a problem in the past too. I remember being a young product manager, got this bug I needed to check, saying, hey, product management, is this the way it's supposed to behave? And I was totally scared of this bug. And testing it was not a big deal. It was just opening the application. You needed to check something that works together with an Excel spreadsheet. But I knew that it was going to be a nightmare because I needed to get, in order to test this thing, I needed to get a Japanese Windows on a PC, and I needed to install our application. I needed to have Excel on it, and that was going to be a nightmare. So my one biggest hope was that it gets fixed fast, so I don't need to reproduce it many times. So testing is not really what is blocking automation many times, but rather the test environment. And I think the more that we automate, the more we figure out the weakest link to innovation and to test automation is not test automation. It's actually getting access to a meaningful and trustworthy test environment. And it took us some, yeah, sorry.
I was just saying, if you want to have continuous testing, then you've got to have continuous available environment. Is that a fair observation? It
is, yes. And I think that if you're trying to get to continuous testing, it is quite clear that there is no way you can do it without automating the test environments. But actually, the more we automate, even without reaching continuous testing, we understand that this becomes a bottleneck. Because when the test, even manually, when it took me 2 days to run tests, then if it took me a day to get the environments, maybe I wouldn't notice it. But if it takes me 10 minutes to run the tests, and it still takes me a day to get the environment up, then it becomes a big problem with my journey to agile or trying to be faster, right? And then the problems with preparing the environments is that, first of all, many still do it manually, and it's inefficient, and it takes a long time. It's very error prone, so there is every chance that you get it wrong. And then infrastructure and configuration issues just mess your tests, and they start failing. And then it's difficult to troubleshoot and to reproduce and understand what's going on. Because if you need to reproduce, then you need to set up a whole new environment, and it took a day. You don't want this to happen again, so you really hope automation succeeds. And then another issue is the lack of ownership, because many times the owner of test environment is not the quality people, it's IT. And how can you be agile if you rely on someone else? And then there's also a question, I don't know if it's a problem for you, but I know it's a problem for us. And that's the lack of governance, or the problems that start coming up when you use, for example, public cloud. We had an issue when we started a performance testing environment, and we forgot it during the weekend. It was a very expensive weekend because we got a $5,000 bill on this little weekend performance escape. And we got yelled by IT. And then the problem is an ownership problem. I think everyone has this problem, because when you try to think a little bit out of the box, you start getting into IT land, and then you start causing problems. And we hear about it in the news. There are a lot of problems when you put accidentally customer information in your public S3 bucket, when you forget credentials in your scripts in GitHub. Everything here happened to all of us. Some of it got to the newspapers and some hasn't. So when we think about how do we deal with environments, today there are three main ways to deal with it. And the first one is manual setup. So when we need to get ready for a test, we manually set up the environment, prepare the infrastructure we install, we make sure that the data is there. And this maybe sometimes works for infrequent tests. I don't know how many of you have these environments that they start whenever they need to do some serious penetration testing or performance testing, or maybe some user acceptance tests that they set up the environment for. And in this case, as we said, the test is only as efficient as the setup. So if it took me 1 day or 3 days or God forbid a month to set it up, it doesn't matter that my test automation runs it in a night. My performance testing suite does not run in a night. It runs in a day that it took to set it up and a night to run the tests. And that's manual setup. And then sometimes what happens is that we start having automation and we say, oh no, we need to run that all the time. So we need to have an environment that's always on. And then we take strategy 2, the static environments, and we build this big thing that we put some effort in because it's going to be always on. We really try to make it look like production. But what happens is that everyone wants to use it. But when we talk about static environments, you know, I've seen the hands come up, and I haven't seen the looks of, oh no, we're suffering from it so much. But I know that everyone I talk to about static environments suffer from it so much, because the one thing that happens is that everyone wants to use it. Okay. Yeah, everyone wants to use it, right? And what happens is that when a lot of teams use the same environment together, they don't have the same agenda. They don't even want to use the same versions of applications. Some of them want to move forward. Some of them want to test other configurations. And what happens is that very frequently, we don't really test the real thing at all. And then it becomes an expensive adventure when we finally come to the conclusion that we cannot go on like that, testing with 80 people on the same shared environment. And then we go to the management and we ask for another static environment. And they tell us, oh no, that's horribly expensive, right? And I had many conversations with different companies that told me that for them, testing environments are the same as production environments. They never go down, which makes them a big problem. They also say, by the way, that they are never the same as production. So that's our static environments, the most common approach. And then we have the ad hoc automation. So at some point, quality people say, okay, we can't go on like that. We're not really testing the real thing. We hear about infrastructure as code, about immutable infrastructure. It's time to do something about it. And we start creating scripts in order to automate it. The issue with it is that nobody ever planned for the engineers to start dealing with provisioning IT. And this is exactly the result that we get. We have someone whose actual job is to do other things that start setting infrastructure for the team. We are making every effort to keep it simple because no one here is a cloud expert or a container expert or an automation, an infrastructure automation expert for that matter. So we try to keep it in the realm of whatever comes out of the box, whatever is simple. So maybe some, you know, Jenkins let you spin up a container, or someone in the team knows how to do something with CloudFormation or whatever tool you're using with Terraform, something open source, something free, so that we don't need to talk to IT about it. And what happens is that it's often too simple. It's too simplistic, right? We're checking systems that should be on very complex infrastructure. We try to put them all on one container just because this is what we know how to do. And when other teams try to use it as well, or when we try to share our work, or when we try to scale it up, it obviously fails. So I want to talk to you about what I think is the right way to approach test environments. And that's dynamic test environments, and looking at all aspects of dynamic test environments as something that needs to be owned by quality and by something that can completely change the way that you do your test automation. And a dynamic approach to environments starts from realizing something that many people don't understand yet, and that is that you need to separate the tests from the test environment, because it's a completely different automation unit. test environments are extremely reusable. Tests, if your test environment automation is the beginning of your test, you should really rethink it. And what's in the scope of test environment is the 3 elements that I talked about. And there is no priority. It needs to all be together because you need it all for the test. None of them can slow you down or be the bottleneck. And that includes the applications, the infrastructure that it's on, and the data set. So the holistic view should be on the test environment. It shouldn't be tucked in the beginning of an automated test. And the second aspect is automation. But I think it's important to understand that automation is a very small thing here. Automation is easy. Setting up automation is easy. The big questions come from scaling it, from maintaining it. So the thinking should be, who owns this automation? And more important than how do we automate? Because there's a variety of tools to automate. How are we going to serve these environments to the different teams? So how do we facilitate self-service? And how do we make sure that we don't upset IT? Upsetting IT means that we don't create test environments that are not secure. We don't start putting passwords in GitHub. We don't forget about cloud cost when we get the AWS credentials. We don't give the entire team, maybe, our AWS credentials or the root credentials to our infrastructure. And these should be things that we think about from day one, because if we start automating tests and we concentrate on coverage, very soon we'll figure out that our entire day is spent on troubleshooting lines and rows and rows of red failing tests.
I think when you set out that there are the 3 components there, the infrastructure, the applications, and the data, Maya, they each throw up individual challenges. With applications, Paul Downey of Barclays was speaking earlier about microservices. And one of the benefits of microservice architecture is that each application team can then take the ownership of making sure that the test environments have the most up-to-date current version of each application component on which the one that you're testing may be dependent. With data, you need to have appropriate on-demand data. So each of these has a dependency. Is that fair?
Yes, I think it is. And I don't think it is something that we can expect to be just generated from a void, right? It needs to be a decision. The decision needs to be we're taking a dynamic approach to test environments. And then the understanding of who owns it, and whoever owns it needs to make sure that these 3 different areas come together. And that's just what you mentioned, is just the technical part. Automating containers is not a big deal. The big deal is to make sure that automating containers is done in a standard way, that in a secure way, and in a way that the entire team has access to, and not just this one person that knows containers. Okay, so I said that I thought that the dynamic approach is better, and I think the benefits are pretty straightforward, but just to emphasize them again, when you use dynamic environments, you make sure that your getting environments is efficient and fast. You don't wait for anyone. It's extremely reliable because automation, when doing a specific thing, does not mess up. It does not misconfigure the environment. It always does the same thing. It also makes it easier to reproduce. And that's one of the biggest problems with test environments. We set them once, we think everything is okay, and our number 1 preference is that nobody touches them. But then the test just messes them all together, and we need to reproduce and to troubleshoot, and that becomes the real pain. And the 4th and very important thing that Justin, you mentioned in the beginning, is creating a foundation for test automation and for DevOps. When we're trying to figure out how we're going to get to continuous testing, even if we're doing manual testing today, then automating test environments is a way to do manual testing faster. It's then a way to do triggered automation testing faster. And it's then a way to connect automated tests to automated environments to the CI/CD pipeline. So it's a very good way to start the journey. this slide. I hope that it's not too tiny.
I think it's readable.
Yes, it demonstrates this path, right? If we start thinking about our test environments, even when we do manual testing, we immediately get more productive and we can test faster. Because if it takes you 2 days to set up an environment, or if you're using a shared static environment and everything always fails, then you get immediate better results. And then you can start investing in proper automated testing or use your existing automation in a proper way. And then we can also save on infrastructure because you can end test environments when you're done with them. You get more reliable testing and more reliable automation. You need to waste less time on troubleshooting. And then you can connect your units of automated test environments to units of automated tests and take that in the direction of continuous testing and tests that run continuously. And then it's just as easy to connect them to your CI/CD pipeline. So it really creates a good path, as opposed to starting from day one from, I'm going to automate everything that I have to get to 90% coverage, and then finding out after a year that you have 14,000 tests and they all fail most of the time. So I want to summarize with some of the main takeaways as I see them from everything I told you today. And the first thing is that I think that trust is more important as an automation goal than coverage. And we should focus on that. We should focus on how do we make people trust our automated tests. The second thing that I beg you to take away, because I've been doing that for a long time, is to separate test from test environment when you automate. And if today your tests, they configure the environment as the first part of the test, please reconsider that. The third thing is that I think the quality community needs to step up and own their test environments. Today, in many cases, it's still IT. And when I talk to quality people, they tell me, oh yeah, the environment is static. We don't really know where it comes from somewhere in the infra dungeons. They just give it to us and we can never change it. Dynamic environments, what do you mean? I have my environment that I test on. I get the parameters, they tell me where to connect to, and I just do it. So this type of thinking, I think, is wrong, and it's just going to leave us behind. And the fourth and last thing, is that we talked about applications, we talked about infrastructure, we talked about data. I mentioned cost and security. This could sound scary. There are so many aspects that you need to master in order to do it right. But I think if you put ownership to it and you make sure that you focus on self-service, you don't necessarily need to be an infrastructure or a cloud expert in order to achieve that. So thinking that you need to upskill everyone on the team so that they know how to deal with AWS or Azure or VMware, I think is the wrong thing to do. It needs to be something that has ownership, its own ownership, and needs to be handled in a very structured way so that you can achieve these benefits.